It's now September 17th, 2024. We've talked quite a few times so far. We're about 30 episodes or so deep into doing the show. You've been through the majority of the season. There's still some left. You're still planting, still going to have sales. You're in the South. Don't really get a hard stop for winter. What I wanted to do, though, for this episode is take a look back at the season that was and look at some of the things that made you successful, tools, infrastructure that you think really helped, what didn't help, things you wished you had. We'll explore that. So when you go back to the beginning, your farm starting up with a limited budget. So it's not just open every tool catalog, go on every website, buy it all. You didn't start with a full toolkit. At the beginning of the season, what was the rough stuff that you had available to use on your farm, from tools to infrastructure? I don't need to go down to like the shovel level, but
Yeah.
broad market gardening, tools, infrastructure, would you have there for people that are just catching up?
Yeah. I had invested the season before in like a good stirrup, which for those of you that don't know the difference between a good and a bad stirrup, go buy a glazer from one of the various people and then go buy one from the big box store and use them side by side and you can really tell the difference. And I think that just comes with spending time being on a farm and like, no, oh wow, no, this makes a massive difference. And so that was a tool that I'd invested a little bit of money in season before. Yeah, a series of like wooden handled tools, like a bed rake. I modified like a little cultivation hand tool on a long like ash handle. So I had some of those, wheelbarrow, just kind of general garden things that most people are going to have, but they were like more upgraded kind of market garden farming versions of them. I had some infrastructure for irrigation, some like inch and a quarter, I think it's inch and a quarter, like black flexible hose, like flexible pipe to use as like headers for our drip. It's really not ideal. I should probably have something a little bit bigger diameter, get some more water, like some more flow through there. But we had that. I had bought a roll of drip tape through Nicholas when he did his big order. He gets a bunch of stuff on a pallet. I threw a 4,000 foot roll of drip tape on there. Paid, I can't remember, 100 maybe $200 for that. And then just finding the little connector pieces and things on Amazon and all those various little bits and pieces. So I had like rough irrigation that I could put on beds right out of the gate. And then other than that, we didn't really have much. I can remember the first little while. Oh yeah, and I had purchased the year before, I had purchased some wind strip trays, kind of those air prune trays. Those are a real godsend to help us get something really tough that's not going to break every time you pick it up. And I think there were 128s, which I really liked. Really cram a lot of starts into those. But other than that, we didn't really have much. I can even remember the first couple of months like hand seeding radishes, just like pinches of them, make a furrow with the hoe or whatever, and then just go through and do it and then just rake it smooth. And we didn't have a seeder. We were just transplanting and then seeding by hand. And then,
You had a tunnel too, right? It wasn't
oh,
skinned
yeah,
that
yeah,
came with
yeah.
the farm.
So I guess on a bigger infrastructure level, yeah, there was a 20 by 45, I believe is the length of it, high tunnel. And it wasn't skinned, but there was a new plastic, like roll of poly that was ready to go on. So I had to redo a bunch of the wiggle wire channel, and I more or less had to rehab it, and then we reskinned it, and then we were ready to go. So it took a little bit of work, but that was already there. And then obviously a smaller kind of hoop house that's like the propagation house that needed a lot of work, still needs a lot of work, needs to be reskinned, but kind of patchworking pieces on the side and walls to just to get it sealed up for winter, and then sort of finagling some sort of a little emitter system to water while I was gone at the other farm during the day, and then basic wash pack, a table, a deep basin sink with two like drain boards on the side, and then a couple of refrigerators, and that's all we really had. And then there was a small tractor with a tiller on the back that we could use to start prepping and shaping beds.
So pretty bare bones when you think about it. When you look at the videos, books, hey, here's the gear to start market farming. You're definitely, I think, on the thin side. You had
Yeah.
access to a tiller or tractor, none of the big things, there's no BCS, you didn't have a Jang at the time, no walk-in cooler, no, like, formalized wash pack setup with a spinner and bubbler and all that type of stuff.
Mhm.
When you look at what you started with, on one hand, it's frugal, we're not spending a lot until we know we're moving the business along, we can reinvest in infrastructure, tools later on. Starting at that level, some people are probably like, it's not enough. Like, I need more." Realistically, how was it operating with that amount of equipment? Is it doable? Did it feel like you're spending more human power and energy or giving up quality because you didn't have a device to help? Because sometimes it's not just I'm saving energy, but it might actually do a better job than what I could do. How did that feel at that stage?
I think there was definitely pieces that we had to add pretty quickly to make it any level of practical or profitable, like season extension other than just the tunnel, like even row cover, like floating row cover and hoops. That because I think we first started getting stuff in the ground about November. Pretty quickly, we needed frost protection right out of the gate. And yeah, and then like obviously getting the greenhouse buttoned up with doors and all that sort of stuff. I wouldn't have really had much of anything in the ground until probably end of February, March if we didn't have any sort of protection. Because even though it's not a particularly bad winter, it's bad enough that things can really take a hit. And having that little bit of season extension really helps. I'd say that, and then if you're going to do a lot of direct seeded stuff, having a seeder. Because like I said, even though I'd sit down there and straddle that 30-inch bed and just like hand seed radishes, it was a pretty good stand of radishes until they all went to seed before they ever even did anything just because timing was off. Rookie mistake. But that's just time consuming compared to taking like a JP1, boom, like 3 passes on a bed for a large watermelon radish, you're done in minutes as opposed to it probably took me half an hour, 45 minutes to like and it was way less accurate. So yeah, definitely like a cedar, season extension, basic wash pack stuff. I think those, at least for our setup and kind of our context, those were non-negotiables that there's no way I would have been able to just bootstrap it any other way other than having that little bit of infrastructure.
Yeah, I think the direct seeder, whether that's an earthway, I know some people get by with that and they have good luck and there's some issues, but hey, it can get people started. That's maybe 125 bucks, something like that on Amazon.
Yeah.
If you go up to a JP1 with the rollers, you're looking at about 650. And we sell those at Modern Grower. People can check those out. We sent you
Mhm.
one there to get you started off. Would you consider that for a market farm? A direct seeder's it's a necessary piece of equipment.
Oh, absolutely. Regardless of which one it is, I know Crystal Organic uses the pinpoint seeder, the little kind of 4-row one. It's like super low tech. There's one moving part, and that's about it. But they don't direct seed as much as I do. But they don't. No, I take it back. They have a Jang for a lot of stuff out in the back. But yeah, whether it's something really small or really low tech, it's an absolute necessity. Just because so many of the high value, like quick turnover crops are direct seeded stuff other than lettuce and maybe beets, which obviously like transplanted beets are going to be a lot slower. For the most part, yeah, you've got to have a way to get seed in the ground accurately and evenly spaced apart without just dumping a bunch of seed.
So that saves time. I think it's gonna be obviously more precise than you could do by
Yeah.
hand ever. And when you're a new operation, limited labor operation, time matters and things
Oh
like
my
that,
gosh.
where it's
Yeah.
just up and down, you can do it and you move on with life. So that gets the plants in the ground. Totally agree that using some sort of tray system to do transplants, I think you're fine. I don't think anybody has to start with a paper pot transplanter at all. I wouldn't recommend that. Think you just get going. That gets your plants into the ground. There's two things there. You can direct seed, you transplant by hand, get whatever set of trays you want, something that can last, something cheaper. I think
Hmm.
you have options there. You mentioned the collinear hoe
Hmm.
for cultivation. That takes care of that part of it.
Yep.
Obviously, irrigation, critical in probably every part of the country now. There's a lot of
More or
different
less.
systems people can look at there. When you start getting into season extension, there's that's going to vary by climate. What are you facing in terms of winter and how heavy you need to go? You had the high tunnel. One thing I was really curious on, you went with just fridges, literally fridges to get through the season. How did that work for you in hindsight? And what do you think about that going forward? Is it something that's workable at your scale? Do you wish you had a walk-in? Do you need to upgrade to a walk-in?
Yeah, well, to answer your last question first, we need a walk-in. We're in the process of talking about taking the tool shed and basically, yeah, foaming it in or whatever we need to do and doing like a cool bot system and making some sort of a walk-in. I don't think we need a big one. I've seen what other farms by stacking vertically, I've seen what other farms are really able to do that are much bigger scale than we are. And it's probably square footage wise, it wouldn't be much smaller than what they're using, what that tool shed would be once it's all foamed in. We've made it work. You have to get creative. You have to time things a little better. We don't have as much of an opportunity to just go and harvest an entire bed of something and just like sit on it for a week and sell it to restaurants or whatever as we can. It's mostly like you harvest the day before, it sits in the fridge overnight, and you take it to market or you take it to a restaurant, and that's it. I want to say in April when we first started the farmers market, I think we packed out the 4 refrigerators we had like very first time, like first full harvest for the market. It was packed. And obviously we're doing like bagged greens. You have a little air in there. It's really bulky. And so it took up a lot of space, but we've been able to make it work. But it's definitely feeling like, all right, we're having to play some weird game of Tetris and deciding like, all right, so peppers and eggplant don't get to go in the cooler. Peppers and eggplant go back to the house and they sit in the kitchen in the air conditioning overnight until farmer's market in the morning because they can handle it. But greens are definitely going in the cooler. So there's this like hierarchy of importance of what has to be in the cooler and what doesn't. But then you also run into risks of freezing. The refrigerators are notorious for having like really cold spots. Actually, I dealt with that today. I pulled out 6.5 pounds of like freshly cut arugula from over the weekend, and I pull it out and like the whole backside of the container was completely frozen solid just because that cold air was just blowing right down the back. So I had to go through and pick all that out. It was probably half a pound. It wasn't much, but it's just one less thing. And then you run into the risk of possible quality control issues. I had bags of lettuce that froze last week in preparation for the farmer's market. So you just turn the refrigerators all the way down, try to create as much of an air gap in the back and let air circulate really well. But I think it's definitely doable if you can find a cheap refrigerators on our scale. 4 seems to be a good fit. Obviously, you rip all the shelves, you rip everything out, and then you have to find containers that will fit within your refrigerator. So there's a little bit of nuance to it all, but I think if you can find cheap ones or even free ones, 3 of my 4 were free, which was nice, and you can do that, and it works in a pinch until you probably have enough money coming in to justify moving up to a homemade walk-in cooler.
How do you evaluate at this point upgrading something or buying something new that you didn't have? So it's either an upgrade or something new based on money. You're not floating in cash, tons of surplus money to just go buy stuff. Yet there are things like a walk-in. Hey, this would really help if we had this. It could make life easier, maybe make the product a little better. How do you look at upgrading, available money, where the business is going, seasonality, and when to pull the trigger? Like a lot of this math going on in your head.
Yeah, there's really not a great I wish I had a great answer like, "Oh, yeah, when it reaches this threshold, can," but, I try to bootstrap things as long as I possibly can. Um, like even thinking now, like, while we're talking and then I'm also thinking, "It's about to get cold, and if we keep things, like, in containers and it's in the barn overnight, we're gonna be into the 50s and then into the 40s and into the 30s at night, and then so do I even need to keep stuff in the cooler? Can I just leave it in the barn?" Maybe we can push off that big investment longer than we need to. So I'm always evaluating like how long can we do without this until we like absolutely have to, just to keep as much cash flow going and maybe find some creative ways around it or to find a better use of our money. Things that are going to increase production definitely are like the number one priority because that's our biggest bottleneck right now. is I can stay up late and bag greens and figure out where I'm gonna put them in coolers or whatever. I can do all that. But if I can't if I don't have enough beds in the ground to or I don't have enough plants in the ground, it doesn't really matter. And things that increase production definitely take priority. And then I'd say then season extension from there, and then wash pack is probably third, and then kind of everything else. I would say up there with production, and I guess it's all tied in with production, but then also like fertility. If it's like, all right, we need to invest in some more or better fertilizer or like soil based inoculants or whatever, I would spend a cool bot's worth of that well before I ever drop the money for a cool bot.
I like the prioritization ranking going on there. Would you put a high tunnel in season extension category or increased production category? I think it
Ooh.
straddles both a little bit.
It really does. Yeah, I think it's almost been its own category, like its own infrastructure category, just because one, it's just such a big investment, but two, it is such a big game changer. And so it's not, it's going to have a much bigger, you're going to feel it a lot more when you do it than you would like buying a bunch of road cover or hoops to do low tunnels, but you're going to have a much bigger return on your investment when you do. So I would say almost like serious, like in the ground infrastructure is its own thing that I think has to really get evaluated and stewed on and crunch the numbers and really look at that over. I would almost even say like over a season. Like got my landlords and saying, we need to get another tunnel. We need to get another tunnel for months. And okay, that's great. Let me just snap my fingers and we'll have a tunnel. Unless you want to like cough up the 5 grand, or we're going to have to wait and do all of our homework and get our NRCS equip grant in, and hopefully we can get accepted, and maybe we can do that next year. But in the meantime, we're just going to have to get creative.
That is one thing I was going to ask about. It is NRCS season for anybody listening to this. If you want to get a high tunnel or low tunnels like our quick hoops, they qualify for equip grants.
Hmm.
Now is the time to start applying. A lot of those windows close in late October, November timeframe. Check with your local NRCS rep. All the states are different. I learned that when we were researching the grants for the low tunnels. You think that's going to
Yeah.
be a standardized system across all 50
Nope.
states? Of course, it's not. There's 50 different ways that this is done. So definitely check with your state. There's a lot of money available. A lot of farmers have taken advantage of it for our low tunnels, the quick hoops, for high tunnels. It seems like every farmer I talk to has at least one high tunnel that's paid for or helped been funded by NRCS. Huge investments, probably the biggest investment you'll make on a farm unless you build like a wash pack building or something like that.
Yeah.
And it's something that can make a huge difference in your season. Push crops into the fall, start crops earlier, get yields like tomatoes earlier into the spring or late summer, early summer, late spring, grow stuff over winter. So that's one that can definitely pay back. And then if you can get the government to pay for it, all the better. So it's like a way of getting your tax money back. So definitely anybody
Yeah.
listening to that, go for that if you can.
Yeah. I would also recommend too, if you are searching for a high tunnel, know that it's a like a reimbursement program. So you do have to pay for it up front, but it might be a good opportunity if you have a family member, a friend, or someone that you have some sort of relationship with that's maybe interested in investing in your farm. This would be a really good, easy way. They could spend 5, 6, $7,000 and more or less get their money back very quickly. There's no, especially if you've already been approved for the grant, but you don't get the money until after you bought the tunnel. It's almost like a guaranteed, at least getting their principal back. And so it might be a good way to dip your toe into kind of sourcing some funding from an outside source and building that rapport with somebody to invest in your business. So think about that too.
Absolutely. And this is something I usually talk to my CPA around this time of year. I know it's September, December 31st seems so far away. We're still in tax year 2024. You're going to make infrastructure investments. If you're going to show a lot of profit on your tax return and you're thinking about getting infrastructure, doing some strategic planning to do stuff like Section 179 write-offs on things to lower your tax burden makes a lot of sense, but give yourself wiggle room. Talk to a CPA now. Don't wait till the first week in December when you don't have a lot of room to get stuff done. So I think that's really important. I know you had access to the tractor with a tiller. You don't have a BCS. You're on a no-till type system.
Yeah.
How's that been? When you see all the farms with BCS, to me, it's almost that's one tool I think is synonymous with market farming. And when I think of market farming, that's something that really just pops in my head is a BCS.
Yeah.
Not having one, do you feel like you ever wanted it this year or wish you'd had one?
Every day. Not even for making beds. It's for everything else. Flail mowing cover crop, harrowing a bed, or using the tiller with a depth gauge to do that. Obviously, we're doing living pathways, so there's no rotary plow to hill up. But theoretically, if we needed to, we could. But it's like using it as a tiller. If push comes to shove, I can go to Home Depot and rent a tiller. I did that in 23 for our little like home plot that we started on. You just rent it for. Oh yeah, here's a trick. Go to Sunbelt and rent stuff from Sunbelt because they only are open Monday through Friday. So if you rent it on Friday for a day, you don't have to take it back until Monday, and you only pay for a day. So there's a little trick. And so yeah, I would.
I
I
got a
think I.
problem. I got a bone to pick with Sunbelt though. I live literally about half a mile from Sunbelt. And when I don't have something I can tow with, and I've needed
Uh,
to rent a few bigger things, and it's like for them to drive the half mile, I know there's a standard rate, but it's $170. And I'm like, guys, I'm right down the road. I get you're formulating everything to just standardize it, but
yeah, that's when you go to Home Depot and you get the truck for $20 and then drive to Sunbelt and they get the
there
thing
you
and then
go.
take it
There you go.
back
That's
and
the hack. You
yeah,
stack it all. But sorry to
yeah.
interrupt.
But when it comes to tilling beds, actually, our tractor's out of commission right now. We blew a hydraulic cylinder, so I can't use it. So next week, I'm borrowing another farmer's just walk behind tiller, like 15-inch or 20-inch walk behind tiller to get some more beds made. And tilling is like the least of the needs of the BCS, especially because I'm no till. Now, if I was still doing like 30-inch market garden style, but I was doing tillage, then I could see, yeah, being able to just go right up the middle and not have to basically completely redo everything. But then again, at that point, it's like, why do the 30-inch beds and all that? Why not just move to a more traditional tractor style width? But yeah, like I'd say the rotary plat or no, the flail mower and some way of like creating a tilth, whether it's the power harrow or whatever. Those are the two things that would really be helpful because trying to mow down an old arugula patch with a push mower, like teetering it on top of the bed and trying to get it as low as you possibly can. And then do you want to leave roots in the ground? So do you try to stir a hoe or do you limb lop all of the like little crowns and bottoms of the plants off? And it just takes so much time. And there's no real good way of terminating a cover crop other than like crimping or tarping. But sometimes you want to have a nice stale seed bed that you can plant into and not just a mulch layer. And I spent a lot of time like looking at financing and prices and equipment and trying to see maybe we can swing that next year. But I always think about a BCS.
So it's on the someday maybe list.
Yeah. Probably right
Respect.
after another tunnel or
Yeah.
right up there
Yeah.
with another tunnel. We'll see.
This is the key, right? You can't have it all. And I think where any business, whether it's me, you, somebody starting a restaurant where you get into a lot of danger is extending too far past that bootstrapping phase too early on. It's like outspending. There's like that term like outkicking your coverage, which I think is used in the
Mhm.
dating scene. People can look that up.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's like outkicking your finances here.
Mhm.
You're overspending relative to the growth of your business. And you might think you need it. Somebody might tell you need it. You might watch some videos and they might say you need it, but you're better holding off. A lot of the successful farmers I talk to, it's this kind of approach. We buy what we need. We don't get too far over our skis here because if you overextend financially and then some life hiccup comes, that's when it's really hard to zig or zag.
Yeah.
All right, no-till beds. Let's leave the living pathways out because I want to hit that next. That's not a tool, but it's a technique.
Yeah.
So we'll wrap that into this conversation. How has that experience been? What you thought it would be going in versus how it actually has been managing it worth the effort. Like that's the chapters of the book I'm looking for here.
Yeah. It's I feel like we've had it relatively easy. I've had to I feel like I've had to really work at it with our, like, heavy clay kind of Georgia soil that we have here. There's not really anybody doing no-till. I think there's a couple. I think Levity Farm was or they are. There's another farm that I knew used to, but then now they've moved to just, like, full on, like, tractor scale type stuff. But yeah, it's not we don't have those nice, soft, fertile soils that or sandy soils that they have in New England or other places. But I've realized that if as long as you keep things wet, keep beds, like, well irrigated, you can pretty much work them how you need to. Now, if you let that bed get dry, it turns into solid concrete. You're not getting a broad fork. I've broken a tine on a broad fork trying to broad fork a dry Georgia clay bed, and no amount of compost can keep that bed wet enough unless you're, like, actively applying some sort of, like, water to it, but it's been relatively good. I don't feel like we have a whole lot of stunting. Oh, man, you can really tell that those plants aren't getting their roots deep in the ground. Everything seems to be growing pretty well. I wish there was a better way of getting fertility down into the soil, but I know that is one of the shortcomings of no-till is that's just gonna take time. Like, letting the microbes, like, cycle those things into the soil. But for the most part, yeah, as long as things stay wet and try to keep the beds covered with compost to help with weed suppression. Transplanting's a bit much. You don't get this nice, beautiful, fluffy cloud that you can just pop a little lettuce into. You really gotta use your finger and really work and get it in there and let that water soak into that bed for a good 20, 30 minutes before you start transplanting. But it's been relatively good. We haven't had any problems on that end. I think we had discussed previously in another episode about how it seems like the soil is responding. Obviously, it's not, oh my God, I've built 3 inches of topsoil in a year, but it seems to be the beds are holding their shape. They're keeping like a nice level of like loft to them. Like they haven't just completely compacted themselves down flat just from gravity and over time as those air pockets settle in. But no, I've been pleasantly surprised at how much easier it's been than I thought it was gonna be.
You think you're managing it now how you would in an ideal world with a bunch of resources? If you had more finances, constant compost, would you be integrating that stuff more, like layering it on more? Or are you doing it probably how you would do it all the time?
Yeah, I don't know. I think if I had more time, I would probably broad fork more. I think at first I started off broad forking between every bed flip, and then now I've realized I don't know if I need to. I'll try to broad fork before like root veg, or if something I know is a little deeper, like deeper rooted, I'll do that. But for the most part, so many of the like mustard greens and salad and lettuce and all this sort of stuff, it's so shallow rooted anyways that it's not really going much deeper anyways. And then if it is, it's like those roots will slowly work themselves down and do that job for you. But in honestly, with the compost, I've found that a bunch of compost just really wants to dry out. And so having a nice kind of 2 to 3 inch layer gives me something nice to plant into, nice to seed into, help keep the like underneath soil really good. And then obviously you are adding some organic matter. But as far as like moisture retention in the soil, nothing beats native soil over like compost. I feel like compost loves to hold on to water and it likes to let go of it as fast as it takes it up.
Yeah, I think it's funny because I do that podcast In Search of Soil as
Yeah.
well. People can check that out on YouTube.
Yeah, I've been nerding out on that a lot lately. I really like it.
Yeah, and yeah, I get a lot of interesting thoughts on compost. So people haven't listened to the show. I talk to a lot of some consultants, but a lot of the people are PhD level practitioners who've studied this stuff. And the general consensus is, compost is good, but there is a feeling, I'd say a general theme that runs throughout is too much. There can be too much where, and it's not just dump truck loads are some sort of miracle cure. And I think that's sometimes how more gardeners paint it
Mhm.
than farmers. Just dump a whole load on there and we're great. I think when you have to buy it for a farm, and there is that balance between, right, we will have to pay for
Yeah.
this, and then we also have to have the labor to spread it, and if you have
Oh, man, yeah.
50 beds or 100 beds, suddenly it's a lot of work to move, 20 yards of compost when you see that pile and you're like, "Oh, I don't just have to put it in a wheelbarrow and dump it, I actually have to get it across the beds in, like, nice little layers." You gotta decide, is it worth it? And that's maybe a follow-up to this. Another tool or a deck or a card in the deck that you have to play as a farmer is fertility. And I'm talking fertility you bring to the table, not what's native, but
Mhm.
adding fertility to the bed, compost, amendments, fertilizer. How did you feel about your fertilization program the first year? It can be something you can invest a bunch in. It can be something that you could just almost forget about in the heat of things. How do you feel like that went?
I definitely feel like the first majority of the season, we let me rephrase that. I think initially we really tried to care. I got compost in super early to put on beds, and then we also I bought like a pallet's worth of fertilizer, just like a basic compost chicken manure based 543 easy sort of organic cheap fertilizer to put on the beds. And as we were like making new beds, we were adding that a little bit of like domolytic lime, just basic stuff. Not really going off of my soil test, but just going off of this is what I have to spend. And I think at this point, I'd rather spend less to buy more, spread that out over the whole area, as I mean, try to at least give some sense of fertility as opposed to really dialing it in specifically and investing a ton of money because it's new soil. I don't know how it's going to respond, and when I know a lot of things can be low, but also if we're trying to be more biologically minded, I don't know, a lot of those things can just be tied up in the soil, and microbes can really help make those things bioavailable. And we just went off of let's get something in the ground, 543, whatever. Didn't really seem to have too much issues. There didn't seem to be any obvious like nutrient deficiencies, like lots of yellowing of the leaves or just explosive vegetative growth with nothing else until we got into summer. And then I feel like with our fruiting crops, all of our nightshades, that's really where I saw it. Like peppers, tomatoes, eggplant have really struggled. I think mostly because we didn't take the necessary steps to really dial that in. And so after that, we decided, yeah, to actually pay attention to our soil test. I got a really comprehensive one from Logan Labs, which after talking to our extension agent for UGA, I think I'll probably just call her directly next time and she can help me out and they can be almost as detailed as Logan Labs is. I think I paid $100 for that one. You have to mail it off, and then they have an agronomist give you recommendations, knowing that you're doing organic vegetables and all that sort of stuff. And so I ended up ordering some like very specific things. Like we were low in nitrogen and potassium, but we were low in nitrogen and phosphorus, but really good in potassium, which is hard to find high N and P without the K. And so we had to get creative, buying more elements of things instead of just a single fertilizer to do that. And then from the beginning, I've been doing like foliar applications of whether it's just basic fish emulsion or now moving to like Neptune's Harvest, like a fish hydrolysate with like kelp and all the other goodies added to it. I try to stay on top of that regularly. And maybe that's the reason why I haven't seen any sort of major nutrient deficiencies, is just because that's been a little bit of a stopgap to carry us through the season.
Yeah, this is good to hear. It's one of those areas that I think is important. It's just as important as some of the tools. If you don't have the right juice in the soil, it's tough to get plants to maximize their genetic potential. And that's what we're ultimately trying to do as growers, one, by providing the conditions for them to maximize their potential, and then two, by providing the nutrients. And we can't rely on it all being there in the soil. Yeah, for In Search of Soil, I did an interview with Bruce Davison, no D, not Davidson, Davison. And he's a farmer turned soil consultant. And he really opened my eyes on soil tests and a lot of the maybe hype around there. Like he had studied under Dr. Elaine Ingham. I know
Mm,
she's viewed as a goddess.
yeah.
Kind of had some things that he questioned about what she said, which I thought went a little against the stream in a good way. It was very enlightening. And a lot of what he touched on was, look, a lot what you hit, it's balance your soils. If you over apply compost, part of the danger in that, and I'm paraphrasing this, is you don't necessarily know the makeup of nutrients in the compost. The compost could be really high in nitrogen and low
Yeah.
in phosphorus. So you apply a bunch of compost to your bed, suddenly your nitrogen goes through the roof. And that upsets the balance of the soil. You're high on nitrogen, you're low on other elements, including some of these critical, more micronutrients. And everything works in a perfect soil and in a balance. Something gets out of whack, it's you have a toothache, you're not as productive with everything else as when that tooth is healthy and feels good. So he was like, you look at it, your soil test, and really try and balance there. Add a little bit of compost for or get the organics in there, but really look at your soil test and balance on a nutrient by nutrient basis, just like you implied. I'm low on phosphorus. I'm just going to supplement phosphorus, or my
Yeah.
calcium's low. I'm going to try and bring that up because you also do experience nutrient lockout. Certain things get low, other things get locked out. And his business was he would look at a soil test and help people adjust based on the crops they're growing. I'll look at it and say, all right, you need to add this. I thought it was an interesting view. That'll be coming up. I think it's episode 29 of In Search of Soil. I'll post it on the Small Farm Smart Feed because I think a lot of vegetable farmers could
Mhm.
benefit from hearing that conversation. But fertility, I think it's up there with, if not ahead of tools. If you're just growing in plain sand, that's obviously an extreme example. You're never going to get the results that you want, no matter how beautiful of a tool you use to prepare the bed.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'd also say I feel like I think I came from a system, that's a good way to put it, where you applied the fertility for that crop when it's all right. Essentially, all the food that this plant's going to need is going in right before that plant goes in the ground. And then as I've read things and studied a little bit and reading and hearing things about things being tied up in the soil and whether they're available or unavailable and cation exchange and all those different nerdy things, realized like there's a good chance I have a lot of what I already need, and it's just whether or not it's available or not. And so I've whether it's right or wrong, I've moved to seeing fertility as like a multivitamin. We're using like feather meal, bone meal. We're using some rock phosphate for that phosphorus. We're using some Epsom salt. And then we're using like C90. So it's this really nice multivitamin, adding a lot of minerals and some of those micronutrients. And so if moving away from like, all right, this plant is going to need a lot of nitrogen. So let's throw a lot of nitrogen at it. And moving away from more of an allelopathic, take this to do this, and more of take this grass-fed liver every day to more or less give you the nutrients that your body can sort of cycle through as it needs to keep you overall healthy. And I feel like it takes a little bit of the pressure off too, because it like I said, we could talk next year and be like, I was totally wrong. I need to do it. Obviously, I'm a year into this now, but I think treating fertility is more of supplementing your a multivitamin to supplement the body that is the soil to keep it overall healthy to perform regardless of what you're planting is the method that I'm going with. Hopefully it works.
Yeah, a holistic approach, right? Versus
Yeah.
like I'm just going to do this as part of lifestyle. No different than eating. You alluded to that there. Earlier in the summer, I got a blood test done by this company, Function Health. They test your blood for all these like biomarkers so you can see things like beyond just like iron and calcium and omega 3s and all that. So then you
Yeah.
can see, all right, here's the things I take, the supplements I take on a daily basis. How do I know if I'm just wasting my money taking those? Am I taking enough? Am I taking too much? And it gives you a realistic picture of this is your blood. We analyzed it. Here's the levels. Here's where you came up low. Here's where you're good. So now
Mhm.
I can adjust what I take for myself to help get things up where they needed to get up. And soil's the same way. If you're just dumping stuff on without testing, you could potentially be messing something up without knowing it. Just because you don't see it doesn't mean there's not some sort of ill effect. And you could be spending a lot of money and time on stuff you don't need. So, yeah, I love the idea of the holistic approach. Back it with testing, see where you're at, balance it out. Because I think it can get too specific. If you are crop by crop, well, this is a heavy feeder. I got to hit it with this. This is a light feeder. I got to hit it with that. Maybe you learn that
Yeah.
over time, 20 years in, 30 years in, you just have this intuitive, I got to kick some nitrogen into the bed before I plant this, and every time I do it, I've done it 500 times, I know I'm gonna get a better crop.
Yeah.
Can't argue with that.
Yeah, and make sure that you're talking to your extension agent. If you're getting a soil test through your land grant university, talk to them about it. Send the results to them, email them. Like they're there to serve you. That is their job. And if you're in an area like we are, where most everybody is, some people are growing vegetables, but it's mostly like row crop type stuff. A lot of cotton, a lot of sorghum, corn. They're not super well versed in it. But then ask like, is there someone in the system that is? And she was like, actually, there's this guy. He's an old veteran. He's been doing it for forever. He knows like vegetables and organic really well. Let me put you in contact with him. And so even if they can't help you, hopefully they know someone in that extension system who can be a good person for you, who knows your region really well. They've seen it all over the years. And so, yeah, make sure that you're staying in constant communication with your ag extension agent, because they can be a big resource, even for small weirdo organic farmers that don't seem to fit with everybody else around them.
Absolutely, it's another good hack, right? Use the resources available in the system. I'm all for, hey, if you have to pay somebody to consult, I think a lot of times that can be worth it because their knowledge can save you. But there's also forms of free consulting out there in the forms of your local extension agent. Reach out to them. Some of the other tools you use this year, and I know they're tools you use because we sent them to you to give them a shot.
Yeah.
One was the germination netting, and I wanted you to try this. This is a new product we were playing around with. It's inspired by Jody Roebuck. Jody's done this for years. He learned it from John Jevons. Essentially, what germination netting is, it's 70% shade cloth, meaning if you held it up to the light, 70% of the light would not pass through. And he doesn't use it to shade crops. He uses it as a germination netting. Direct seeds a crop, puts the germination netting on top. It's porous, so you can water it in. But for things like carrots, it just helps. It's a little bit of like a insulating layer for the water. Helps keep the water in, keeps birds off of it, and shades it off. Keep that bed a little bit cooler right where it's at. What was your experience using that this year? Because you're in Georgia, you get the summer heat, probably tough to germinate certain things. Thoughts?
Oh yeah. I mean, it's tough. And then when you throw in the compost element where that top 2 inches just wants to dry, like one dry afternoon, like one hot afternoon, and that first couple inches is just bone dry. And so yeah, we've had a lot of germination issues this year, and it was a real game changer. It really helped, yeah, just take the heat off, let those soils cool down a little bit. It's obviously black compost, you're really drawing in a lot of heat. You're blocking in a little bit of moisture, but you can take advantage of the rain, can take advantage of some overhead watering that we're doing for things like lettuce in the summertime just to cool them off. You're also making sure that those bed stays good as opposed to like running emitters constantly every day. And so it's for things like beets and like turnips and radishes, it was a real game changer. And yeah, and then all of our like baby greens, arugula, mizuna, all that sort of stuff. I haven't really had much luck with carrots with it. I think it's mostly just it's so hot and dry, and we're using compost that it just I really think I need to use I have a small white tarp. It's actually like a big piece of vinyl. It doesn't even cover. It's like only 30 feet long. So I was doing 30-foot chunks of carrots at a time, and I could do it 3 times on a bed, more or less. But I think I said this to someone the other day. Like if there was white germination netting, I think that would be a huge game changer for like hot places, because you can get that like soil coverage to keep things moist, but then also you can reflect a lot of that heat off.
Mm.
And so I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to take one of my silage tarps and just cut like a bed length or bed width length off of one of them, sacrifice that, and then just have like my carrot germination, because I'm not really doing more than one bed at a time. Maybe I'll do two, so I have the option to do 2 beds at a time, and that be like my carrot germination tarp. But for the most part, I really loved it. It really helped with basically every other crop that we used it with. Yeah, the water infiltration was a big game changer instead of just watering it in and tarping it and hoping that it stays nice and moist.
One of these things like silage tarps, it's a passive tool, works forever, no power, nothing.
Yeah.
It just works for what you need it to. Lasts a long time on the field. farm has a couple silage tarps, I think a couple sets of these nettings. You can move them around, really helpful. But these things they do functions without you having to do anything. So they can just
Yeah.
sit there passively providing something, whether that's breaking down a cover crop, keeping moisture in the soil. Those are little handy
And
things.
suppressing weeds. So we haven't talked really about that, but it's that 70% shade is probably similar to what the canopy would be of a crop.
Yeah.
And I noticed, yeah, like really great weed suppression on like heavily densely sown things like arugula. We do between 5 and 6 rows on a bed, really cram it in there since we're cutting it. Yeah, and it does a great job of suppressing weeds, letting that arugula get a big head start to the point where sometimes because we're planting it so dense, it outshades and outcompetes anything else right from the get go without any cultivating.
Yeah, and weed suppression, another thing that you tried, Soil Shield, pre-cut landscape fabric.
Yeah.
This is a product that we explored this year. We'd heard a lot of growers who are having trouble with weed pressure, and just knowing that burning holes in landscape fabric is something farmers have done for a while to make it a little easier. We got fabric with pre-cut holes in it. And it's one of those things I totally get. Some people hate plastic. They don't want to look at it. But it is one of those tools where if you have a lot of weed pressure on the farm,
Mhm.
it comes down to, what do you like more? Doing the weeding
Yeah.
or looking at the plastic? And if it can save you time, then this is a choice where I think it really helps, because I think weeds can literally take over and derail a lot of farms that have low labor, make crops unharvestable, kill morale, burn farmers out, shut down beds, huge catastrophic problems from it.
Mhm.
So if you can find a tool again that works passively to help you do that, especially in a low labor situation, which is what landscape fabric does, then that's a win. And it doesn't have to be, I always tell people, this doesn't have to be something you use for the next 10 years. It can be a
But you
means to an
can,
end.
it'll last.
Yeah, that's the good thing. It'll last. It's not going anywhere. So it's not a one and done. It's not, I know people don't like plastic because it ends up in a landfill, but that doesn't mean all plastic is instantly disposable like a water bottle.
Yeah.
It's some things, if you can use it, get life out of it for 10 years, that's a long time. And that plastic served a lot of utility over those 10 years. And then maybe during that time, you start working on your own method of cultivation to help lessen your own weed pressure, and you move away from landscape fabric. But this gets you there. It gives you an edge when you don't have a lot of time, when you don't have labor early on. What was it like for you planning into that and using that?
Yeah, I really liked it. Yeah, I've got them all out there right now. All my, like, long season stuff, okra, eggplant, peppers, probably do tomatoes in them next year. Yeah, oh, man, because yeah, our weed pressure, especially this summer, the grasses have been so intense, just crazy, and then you throw in the living pathways, and it's just I felt like I just fought grass and weeds all summer long, and it really almost did derail everything, but I didn't have to worry about it on those few crops just because it's like it was great. The soil stayed moist, it was covered, but it kept a lot of, like, splash from getting up because there's not just a bunch of exposed soil getting everything, so, like, I have peppers and eggplant, like, some of those branches have, like, drooped down and they're, like, resting on it, but they're, like, perfect, pristine, and clean. They don't have a bunch of dirty crops that are getting splashed with compost and different things. I know for a lot of people, if you're doing, like, lettuces, it can be really good. Keeps everything really clean for if you're doing head lettuces and stuff like that. And so yeah, I've loved it. I'd say one thing that I made the mistake of laying it out and immediately stapling it down and realized that you need to lay it out in the sun and let it shrink and form and do its thing. Like fresh out of the package, it seemed to be a little not loose, but it shrunk a few inches. And so stapling it down, I think I ripped out the staples in from that first staple because I stapled it down like super tight. Didn't want it to go anywhere. And then on my next ones, I just laid them out, couple of sandbags, just let them sit in the sun for a couple of days, shrunk up, stapled it down, and they're perfect. So I really wanna get more. I really like using those.
Yeah, it's good to hear, and it's a little trick, works for some people, and that's, what we're trying to provide when I look for solutions to farmers. It's how can I make people's jobs, lives a little bit easier? It's not
Mhm.
always fancy motorized things or metal things. Sometimes it is these little passive things that are just there. It's like a spoon. You can eat soup easier with a spoon than a fork. It's not
Yeah.
some crazy invention, but it just works well for what it does. Of everything you had on the farm this year, is there one thing that you talked BCS and another high tunnel, anything you just wish you had? Let's just say realistically, not, "Oh, I wish I had it just because it would be cool," but is there one tool thing that you really wished was on farm this year? Quick cut greens harvester because you were harvesting my greens by hand?
I think about that a lot too. But at the same time, taking the time to go slow, because it is new and whether it's I feel like there's a lot of, like, dead leaves or there's little disease or pests and stuff, and I'm already having to pick a lot of that, like, out of the bubbler or out of it after we've spun everything. And in some ways, I almost feel like me having to go slow and grab handfuls and cut it with a knife has forced me to I can if I see let's say a big growth of Mizuna, and the outer leaves, maybe they were left over from a cut or 2 previous, they're really yellow, full of holes or whatever. I can just grab around them and then leave them in place and then just pick them out later when I'm done, where with the greens harvester, you're just hacking everything and then you're having to dig all that out later. So in some ways, I almost wonder, and I know you had a recent conversation on the microgreens podcast with some guys that were saying that at the end of the day, like, just using a really sharp knife like, you can't beat it because it's super accurate, you only get what you want, and so, that sounds like a fun time-saving tool, but I think it slows me down in a way that I probably need to really be paying attention to what's going on instead of just, like, scalping an entire thing. Now, if we get to the point where we've got our system really dialed in and we don't have disease issues and whatever, and I can just go through and harvest a whole stand of arugula or a whole stand of Mizuna and really, like, truly start doing, like, real baby leaf stuff, then, yeah, I think that would be a really valuable tool. But honestly, I'd say the one tool that I wish I had was like a flail mower. Like, it doesn't even have obviously a BCS with a flail mower attachment would be great, but if I don't know, Husqvarna or whatever made like a standalone like push flail mower or something that was just flat that you could run over a bed to just chew in a yeah, a lot of these same greens and things that I'm cutting, it's just so hard to deal with them. You're either ripping them out and then you're not leaving roots in the ground, or you're mowing it down and then you've got all these kind of crowns everywhere, or you're trying to tarp it and then it's just a mess, especially if you're trying to direct seed. So, yeah, if someone has built, a standalone flail mower at home that they want me to try, I'll send it on my way. I'll give it its best shot.
That's a cool idea. And I think hearing this is one of those things where, at least in your case, tools don't make a farm.
Yeah,
Tools don't make a farm successful. Tools make farming easier or they increase productivity, but you don't have to have it.
yeah,
And if you are starting up, you might budget out, here's all the things I need. And I'm saying this as somebody who has a tool company. Maybe you need to go through that list and line
yeah,
out some of those things and say, what can I get away with not having right away? What can I save dollar wise by not buying that thing right away? Because that money might be more valuable in your bank account, even if it's just psychologically, than it would be investing in some sort of tool that sits there.
mhm,
Because there are a lot of tools that are, I don't want to say useless, but they're maybe useless early on. Some farms that are huge, doing a lot of production, they have things dialed in. They are okay investing in one nuanced thing that does one specific function and they use it once a week because that saves their farm at their operation, you know, 20, 30, 40 minutes, and that works for them. But at the startup phase, you can't get to that level of nuance. It's, hey, we need a tent, a sleeping bag, and some cookware and a water purifier. Let's not worry about getting the lightest possible system that we can here. Just give me bare bones something so we can get
Yeah.
it done. But I love this idea of talking tools. We can probably circle back, do another one later at some point. Any final closing words on this?
I would just say, because I get asked this question from time to time, like, what's the one tool if you had to do what everything? I would say the JP one. You got the X, the Y, and the F roller. And I have one more. Maybe it's the XY. I can't remember. But yeah, just get the 24 hole roller. You can do 99% of anything you need to direct seed with those. And you can get it's so precise, it's so accurate, and it's so fast and easy, and it can like plow through a good bed. If you could get the double disc opener, that would be even better if you've got residue on the top of the soil, but that's got to be my number one. That's that tool. Obviously, you were gracious enough to send that on to me, which I'm yeah, beyond grateful for. But yeah, I would say that tool would have paid for itself very quickly, just with the ability to sow things, and then you can sow stuff really dense if you know that there's going to have like poor germination. Like we have really poor beet germination, so we can really just crank out some beets and adjust the gear ratios if we need to. But that's definitely the one tool that I don't know how you market farm without it, really.